I've been a dumb artist before, just signing shit, just get, because they get you with the money. You gotta think, you 20 years old, these folks like, look, you got a hot song, let me give you $2 million. But then I'm gonna own you.
What if I told you one of the biggest rappers in the world almost lost millions? Not to the streets, not to taxes, but to the people who were supposed to protect him. Offset didn't get finessed because he was reckless. He got finessed because he trusted the wrong system. See, when you're young, hungry, and finally see money on the table, nobody tells you the real price. They don't tell you that the advance isn't free. They don't tell you that ownership lasts longer than fame. And they definitely don't tell you that smiling contracts can turn into lifetime chains. Now fast forward, Offset is older, wiser, and finally speaking up. And when he started breaking down how artists really get trapped, one name instantly came back into the conversation.
Because at first, when I first came in the game, well, you got 2 million for me? Man, run it. Publisher, you got 5 million? Run it. Not really reading the terms, not really understanding, and then your lawyer ain't gonna tell you, your lawyer gonna tell you what you gotta do, but I feel like if you build with your lawyer, like I talk to my lawyer day to day, when I'm asking questions, and he know like, I'm gonna ask this question, and I need you to break it down into a way that I can understand, so I understand what I'm signing up to, because I've been a dumb artist before, just signing shit, just getting, because they get you with the money. You gotta think, you 20 years old, these folks like, look, you got a hot song, let me give you $2 million. But then I'm a...
Wack100, millions of dollars, questionable deals, street politics mixed with music business, and a dice game that allegedly changed everything. Some people say Offset was robbed. Others say that's not the truth at all. What makes this story dangerous isn't just the money, it's the silence, the screenshots, the DMs, and the fact that every side claims they're telling the truth. So what really happened between Offset and Wack100? Who benefited? And who paid the real price? This isn't just rap drama. This is how the industry really works. Before the money, before the fame, before the luxury and headlines, Offset was just another young artist trying to escape his circumstances. Like many rappers who come from nothing, his first real encounter with the music business didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a blessing. When someone slides a contract across the table and tells a 20-year-old, here's $2 million, logic disappears. Dreams take over. Survival kicks in. Nobody stops to explain what ownership really means or how long control lasts once you sign it away. Offset has spoken openly about this stage of his career. He didn't hide it. He admitted that early on, he signed deals without fully understanding the terms. Not because he didn't care, but because nobody ever broke it down in a way that made sense to someone who wasn't trained in contracts, publishing splits, or recoupment language. That's the first illusion of the industry. You think the money means freedom, but it actually means obligation. Labels don't invest out of kindness. Every dollar they advance is a loan, and every loan comes with strings attached. Studio time, marketing, travel, visuals, all of it gets charged back to the artist. So even when the music is successful, the artist can still be in debt on paper. Offset explained how confusing this can be when you're new. An album drops, numbers look massive, and fans assume the artist is rich. But behind the scenes, the accounting tells a different story. Millions generated doesn't mean millions earned. That realization didn't come overnight. It came after years of watching statements that never matched the success of the music. After realizing that ownership mattered more than exposure. After understanding that the people who truly win in this industry are often the ones whose names aren't on the marquee. Offset reached a point where he stopped blaming the system and started blaming his lack of knowledge. And that's when his mindset changed. He began asking questions, not just signing what was put in front of him, but breaking it down line by line. He started communicating daily with his lawyer, demanding clarity instead of comfort. Because in this industry, comfort is usually expensive. This shift in perspective didn't just protect his future, it reframed how people heard his words later on. When Offset started talking about how artists get finessed, people listened differently. He wasn't complaining, he was warning. And that warning is what connects directly to why his name eventually became linked to Wack100 in public conversation. Wack100 has been a visible figure in hip-hop for decades. Loud, connected, and unapologetic. He's managed major artists, navigated street politics, and positioned himself as someone who understands both the business and the culture. But with that visibility came controversy. Over the years, multiple industry voices have questioned Wack's deal structures and management style, not in court documents, but in conversations, interviews, and podcasts where patterns were discussed rather than accusations proven. One of the biggest criticisms centered around control, specifically situations where the same person acts as both manager and label. On paper, this might look efficient. In reality, it creates a power imbalance where the artist has no independent advocate. Offset never publicly accused Wack100 of stealing from him. That part matters. What happened instead was more subtle. As Offset described how young artists get locked into bad deals, fans began connecting dots on their own. They compared his warnings to stories they'd already heard about Wack's business dealings with other artists. Perception filled the gaps. And in the internet age, perception can feel just as powerful as proof. People didn't need Offset to name anyone. His description of the system already matched narratives that had been circulating for years. That's how assumptions formed, not from direct accusation, but from pattern recognition. Offset was careful with his words. He spoke broadly about the industry, not individuals. But once a story exists online, it evolves without permission. That evolution accelerated when personal relationships got involved. Wack100 had long-standing ties to Cardi B, relationships that existed before Offset and Cardi ever became a public couple. So when Offset and Cardi's issues began playing out publicly, Wack found himself unavoidably close to the situation. At that point, business and personal tension started blending together. What might have stayed as abstract industry criticism turned emotional. Trust, loyalty, and boundaries became part of the conversation. And once emotions enter the picture, logic usually exits. Offset believed his name was being dragged into narratives he didn't approve of. Wack believed he was being blamed for situations he didn't orchestrate. Each side felt misrepresented. And that's where this story stops being about contracts and starts being about control of narrative. Because in hip-hop, reputation is currency. By the time rumors reached their peak, Offset wasn't just defending his finances. He was defending his integrity, not with public rants, but with silence and selective clarification. What many people missed is that Offset had already learned his lesson. He wasn't scrambling to fix mistakes anymore. He was trying to make sure he didn't repeat them. That's the difference between early Offset and present-day Offset. One signed because he was hungry, the other questions because he's experienced. And that transformation is the foundation of everything that comes next. Because once you understand how the industry really works, you stop playing defense and start paying attention to who benefits when stories are told a certain way. And that's exactly where the next chapter begins. By the time Offset started speaking openly about bad deals and industry manipulation, the damage was already done. Not to his money, but to his name. Because in hip-hop, once your name enters public debate, you don't control how the story spreads. And that's exactly what happened next. What began as a general warning about the music business slowly morphed into something more personal. Fans didn't just hear Offset talking about predatory contracts, they heard echoes of stories they already knew. Stories involving Wack100. Wack isn't just a manager, he's a personality. Loud, confrontational, and deeply connected. Someone who doesn't operate quietly behind the scenes, but right in front of the camera. And that visibility made him an easy target once conversations about finessing entered the timeline. Online, people started asking questions that Offset himself never publicly asked. Why do certain artists under Wack always seem unhappy later? Why do deal structures always sound so complicated? And why does Wack always seem to be in the middle when things go left? Again, none of this was proof. But the internet doesn't wait for proof. It runs on patterns. Things escalated when personal relationships entered the mix. Wack100 had a long-standing relationship with Cardi B, long before she ever became Offset's wife. That history mattered, because when Offset and Cardi's marriage problems became public, lines got blurred. Suddenly, business tension collided with personal loyalty. Wack spoke openly about feeling dragged into Offset and Cardi's issues. From his perspective, he was being blamed for situations he didn't create. From Offset's perspective, his private life was being discussed in spaces he never approved. And that's where trust broke down. Things reached a boiling point when information about Offset allegedly began circulating online. information that could have seriously damaged his public image. Offset believed Wack should have controlled the situation. Wack claimed he didn't know anything until it was already spreading. Two men, two versions, one internet. What complicated everything further was Blueface. Blueface was under Wack's management, and he publicly posted content involving Offset that sent shockwaves through social media. Offset immediately assumed Wack was behind it. In the industry, managers are responsible for their artists, especially when their actions spark chaos. Wack denied orchestrating anything. He said Blueface acted on his own without permission. According to Wack, once he found out, he immediately reached out to stop things from escalating. But damage doesn't wait for explanations. Offset was heated, calls were made, accusations flew. The situation felt out of control until Cardi B herself stepped in. This part matters. According to Wack, Cardi personally contacted him and asked him to keep things contained. Not for drama, not for headlines, but for peace. At that point, she and Offset were already separated, and she didn't want to be dragged deeper into public chaos. Out of respect for her, Wack claims he stopped everything. No more exposure, no more escalation, no more fuel. That should have been the end of it. But stories don't always end when the people involved decide to stop talking. Sometimes they take on a life of their own, and that's exactly what happened when the Dice Game story resurfaced. This wasn't new information. The story had existed for years. But now, with tension already high, it felt explosive. According to Wack's version, a dice game at QC Studios in 2019 became the spark that people pointed to as the origin of deeper conflict. He described a situation involving Offset and 42 Dugg that escalated after someone tried to leave the game early. Wack was careful with his words. He never said Offset robbed anyone. He said Offset confronted someone for violating dice game etiquette. In street culture, that distinction matters. But online, nuance disappears. The story quickly turned into Offset robbed 42 Dugg, even though Wack himself never claimed that. And once that narrative took hold, both Offset and Dugg were forced to respond. Here's where things got messy. 42 Dugg went live and denied everything. He put his reputation on the line, saying he walked away with all his money and jewelry. He swore on his mother's life, something that carries extreme weight in street culture. That should have closed the case. But then Wack did something unexpected. He released direct messages from Offset himself. Messages where Offset appeared to acknowledge Wack's version of events. Messages that contradicted what 42 Dugg was saying publicly. Messages that suggested Offset wasn't mad at Wack over the story, but actually agreed with how it was being told. Now the internet was confused. Was Offset backing Wack? Was 42 Dugg lying? Or was everyone protecting themselves? No clear answers emerged, only louder debates. And that's when people started tying everything together. The dice game, the business issues, the tension with Wack, the Migos split. Suddenly fans were building full conspiracy theories, but Offset shut that down himself. When asked directly why Migos fell apart, he didn't blame drama, women, or street issues. He blamed business, money, ownership, growth. He said he wanted a bigger piece, not from his brothers, but from the system. He had kids, a family, and he was no longer willing to accept deals that didn't reflect the value he helped create. That honesty reframed everything. It wasn't beef, it wasn't jealousy, it wasn't ego. It was evolution. But even evolution has consequences, because once Offset stepped into that mindset, he stopped being easy to control. And in an industry built on leverage, that makes people uncomfortable. By this point, the narrative was spiraling beyond facts. Every old clip was re-examined, every interview was reinterpreted, every silence was treated as a statement, and the pressure was building towards something inevitable. A moment where the internet would stop asking questions and start deciding outcomes. And that's exactly where this story heads next. By the time all the stories collided, the business disputes, the dice game, the tension with Wack100, one thing became clear. The internet was trying to force everything into one explanation. And that explanation was conflict. But real life is never that simple. Offset eventually stepped forward to shut down the loudest theories himself. When people tried to connect the dice game, street politics, and personal drama to the breakup of Migos, he made it clear that wasn't the truth. According to Offset, the split didn't come from ego, betrayal, or outside beef. It came from business. As he got older, his priorities changed. He wasn't just thinking like an artist anymore. He was thinking like a father, a provider, and a businessman. He started paying closer attention to contracts, revenue splits, and ownership. And what he saw didn't sit right with him. Offset said he wanted a bigger piece. Not from Quavo, not from Takeoff, but from the business structure surrounding them. The machine they were operating inside didn't allow growth the way it should have. And once he realized that, he couldn't unsee it. That realization changed everything. Because when one member of a group starts asking deeper questions, the system starts applying pressure. Subtle pressure, media narratives, rumors, division. Offset hinted that outside business interests benefited from Migos being less united, because divided artists don't negotiate together. They don't challenge contracts together, and they don't hold leverage the same way. This wasn't paranoia, this was experience. And while the internet wanted to paint the split as drama, Offset framed it as maturity. But maturity doesn't mean peace, it means difficult decisions. And those decisions came with consequences Offset is still living with. The most emotional part of this entire story has nothing to do with Wack100, contracts, or money. It has everything to do with Takeoff. When Takeoff passed, the internet immediately rushed to fill the silence with narratives. Some claimed Offset and Takeoff weren't close anymore. Others suggested tension before his death. None of that came from people who actually knew them, and that hurt Offset deeply. In one of his most vulnerable moments, he admitted something he had never said out loud before. Guilt. Not legal guilt, not blame, but emotional responsibility. Offset said he often wonders what would have happened if he never went solo, if he had stayed fully active within the group, even while unhappy with the business side. He believes that when he was around, he was the one who read the room, the one who sensed when energy shifted, the one who said, "We should leave." And the night Takeoff lost his life, Offset wasn't there. That thought haunts him. That's not something you say for sympathy. That's something you say because it's heavy, because it lives with you. And while he was processing that grief privately, he had to watch strangers online speculate about his relationship with Takeoff, turning pain into content. That's when this entire story stopped being about industry drama and became something much deeper. It became about how narratives are created without context, about how silence is misread, about how men in hip-hop are expected to carry trauma quietly while the world debates their lives like entertainment. So where does Wack100 fit into all of this? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Offset and Wack weren't enemies in the way the internet wanted them to be. They disagreed, they clashed, they had tension. But when it came to the Dice Game story, Offset privately acknowledged Wack's version, even while public narratives exploded. That alone complicates the idea that Wack was simply lying for clout. At the same time, 42 Doug stood firmly on his truth, swearing nothing was taken from him. And in street culture, that kind of statement carries weight too. So who's lying? Possibly no one. Possibly everyone is telling their truth from their own angle. And that's the part the internet struggles with. Because stories don't always have villains and heroes. Sometimes they just have people protecting themselves in different ways. What's undeniable is this. Offset's journey exposed how dangerous the industry can be when artists don't fully understand the business side early on. He admitted he signed deals without reading them, trusted people too quickly, took advances without understanding ownership. And by the time he realized what was happening, he was already trapped. That honesty matters, because it explains why he speaks the way he does now, why he questions everything, why he pushes back, why he refuses to move blindly. And despite everything he's been through, the losses, the tension, the criticism, Offset doesn't believe hip-hop is dying. He believes it's evolving. He points out something important that often gets ignored. There are more Black executives in music now than ever before, more ownership, more decision-makers inside buildings that used to exclude them. He still believes in the culture. He just believes artists need to be smarter. That's the real takeaway. Not whether Wack finessed someone, not who won a dice game, not who exposed what. The real lesson is this: the industry rewards ignorance and punishes awareness. Offset learned that the hard way. And instead of staying silent, he chose to speak, even knowing it would reopen old wounds and invite speculation. That's growth. That's risk. And that's why this story still matters. Because it's not just about Offset. It's about every young artist watching this, thinking money equals freedom, without realizing freedom comes from ownership, understanding, and unity. And until that lesson becomes standard, stories like this will keep repeating. If you made it this far, don't just let this story end here. Because this isn't just about Offset, Wack100, or anyone's situation. This is about how the music industry really works, and how easily the truth gets buried once narratives take over. We've seen how fast rumors turn into facts online, how business disputes get framed as street drama, and how artists are judged before the full picture ever comes out. That's why conversations like this matter. So now we want to hear from you. Do you think the industry is still set up to finesse artists the same way Offset described? Do you believe business pressure played a bigger role than personal conflict in how everything unfolded? And when stories clash like this, who do you trust? The loudest voice or the receipts? Drop your thoughts in the comments, respectfully. Debate the ideas, not the people. If you value real breakdowns without hype or bias, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. More deep dives are coming, and the next story might change how you see the culture entirely. Until then, stay informed, stay critical, and remember, in hip-hop, silence isn't always weakness, and noise isn't always truth.